Hi and welcome to The Practice Gap, the podcast for closing the gap between the practice you have and the one that you want. I'm Elizabeth, a chiropractor, a business owner, coach and entrepreneur on a mission to help you move from frustration and overwhelm to clarity, focus and joy in practice. 3, 2, 1, yeah! Dear audience, this next episode is a special one. It's from a loud and busy airport lounge in Chicago, where I got a hold of Dr. John Cox, a chiropractor who's been practicing for over 40 years. He's 67 years old and he's still super excited about practicing. As you will hear, he has great teaching experience. When I ask him a question, he will go on for an hour, which is beautiful. In this podcast, he will give young chiropractors advice for when they first start out in practice, how to build a practice when you know absolutely no one. And for you older chiropractors, your dinosaurs and out there, or seasoned chiropractors, it's a joy to listen to someone who's so inspired still after so many years in this profession. This episode is also very special to me because his father, Dr. Alex Cox, was the first chiropractor I went to and is the reason why I'm in chiropractic today. When I was a student, I was 20 years old. I went to school in Madison, Wisconsin. I was pre-med. I wanted to become a medical doctor. I met two rowdy Norwegian chiropractic students in Madison, Wisconsin, out in the downtown area. I talked to them for some hours and I was sent to a chiropractor in Montorb. That was only half an hour outside Madison. I had so much neck pain, I had so many headaches. And going to get adjusted by Dr. Alex Cox at the Gonstead clinic, it completely changed my life. And I decided to change my career path from wanting to become a medical doctor to wanting to become a chiropractor. And that has been a decision I've never ever regretted. So I hope you will enjoy this episode and please excuse the quality of the audio for this episode. It's a lot of background noise, but I assure you it will be worth listening to. Thank you. Good morning. I'm here in Chicago at the O'Hare airport. And I am so lucky to have Dr. John Cox in our little new studio in this hotel. Could you please tell the audience or listeners a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about myself. Well, it's an honor to be with you this morning, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you.
Yes, really is very nice. Well, I am a second-generation chiropractor. I never intended to be a chiropractor because it looked like too much work for me based upon my father and uncle's life. You know, those guys, like we were talking about yesterday, you know, they were there from 8 until midnight, 5 days a week, and then 8 till 2 in the morning on Saturdays, and then Sunday mornings. And so I came up thinking I was going to be an athlete and go down that route, and I played college football, and it didn't work out like I had planned to maybe go to the next level. But in the meantime, I thought, well, maybe I would get into chiropractic. And so I took all of the prerequisites to get into Palmer College if I decided to do that. And so when my dad learned that I was taking other classes that could get me into Palmer, he says, well, if you think you might be considering being a chiropractor one day, he said, maybe you should come into the clinic and start saying how you want to, if you really want to hang around people that are in pain and sick. I said, okay, so he put me in the x-ray department when I was in undergrad in the summers and on the holiday months. And I worked at that time. Bill Dressler had just graduated from school and joined the staff at the clinic in 1976. And for 76 and 77, Dr. Gonstead passed away in 70. And I had the chance to be at the clinic, taking 30 to 35 x-rays every single day, 6 days a week, with new patients. And that was when the clinic's production was huge. And so I worked in there, and I thought myself, coming up as a chiropractor patient of my father's, that chiropractic was for neck pain, low back pain, if you had a cold, if you had a fever, the things I had experienced from chiropractic. I had no idea that chiropractic could do so much more until I started working there, and I saw some amazing changes in patients that I had no idea. And having the chance to meet the patient after we did the case histories, actually, we sat down and asked the patient what was going on. It was very brief, but we did that. And then when they got in to see my father, Doug or Jim or Ray or Gonstead, then they would follow up on the notes that we had making, just the basic things like we would take their blood pressure, we would ask what their chief complaint was, how long it's been going on, and things like that. But then they would be sent to, we would then take them in the x-ray, and we would take an x-ray of them, and then they would be seeing one of the doctors at the clinic. And probably the thing that transformed me and said, this is bigger than I realized, there was a little boy that arrived at the clinic, and he was about 5 years of age. And all he could do was lay flat on his back or on his stomach, very little movement. But if you shook some keys above him, he would follow it with his eyes back and forth, but that was all. He didn't speak, had never spoke, had never crawled. They had him in physical therapy right up until the point of he arrived at the clinic. They'd been everywhere. In a famous clinic up in Minneapolis called the Mayo Clinic, they had come from there and they came down, and they said he had some level of mental retardation, and it was pretty severe, and that's all they could say, because they couldn't find any physical things problem. They couldn't, he didn't seem to have cerebral palsy or anything like that. And so they sent him in an x-ray department, and my dad wanted a neutral cervical shot, and we had to do him in the prone position because he couldn't be held up. His head would just flop and stuff. And my dad also wanted a flexion shot. And so that was the first time I ever taken a flexion cervical x-ray at that point. I'd been there over a year by that time. And I didn't understand why he wanted to have the flexion. And the flexion was my father, in talking with the parents before he even thought about x-raying the child, because we usually didn't x-ray young kids like that, was if a child or an adult has an Aas-Jakobsen, well, as the condyle gets very proximal to the posterior arch of atlas. So if you do a flexion shot, you don't get the gap, it stays in that AS position. And I didn't know anything about that at that time. But anyway, so the little boy ends up seeing my father. And it turns out, we didn't know what he adjusted, but after this all happened, I asked my dad, I said, what in the world did you do to that kid? So he adjusted the child, he waited 3 or 4 days, he checked the child again, gave him one more adjustment, and then they were told to go home. And they had come from several hours away to the clinic. So they came back in about a month's time. They stayed for another 4 or 5 days at the clinic. My dad adjusted him one more time during that time, so he had now his third adjustment. He was told, now give him another month or so and come back and continue the physical therapy. So from where we took the x-rays in the x-ray room, we walked across the hallway where the patients would go down toward my father's room at that time. Gonstead was on the other side of the hall. That's where we analyzed the x-rays. As I was walking from the x-ray with a set of films that I was going to analyze for one of the doctors, from the reception area up there in the waiting room, the mother who I had met, obviously because she's bringing the child in, the mother is walking, and the little boy, who now we're talking 5 months later, 4 or 5 months later at the most, is army crawling down on his stomach. And I stop, and I go, what's going on? She goes, it's a miracle. He's come back to life. And I said, well, this is wonderful. And his head's up, he's looking around, he's trying to babble some words and stuff like that. So the interesting thing about that is that's when I asked my dad, what did you do to this kid? What did you yank on to do that? And he told me about the Aas-Jakobsen. That's all he ever adjusted on the kid. But the coolest part about it is they followed that little boy for the next 3 years. He never had his condyle adjusted again like that. Mother became a patient, so they would come back. But they followed that little boy over the next 3 years. He caught up completely, physically and mentally, almost mentally. He had to learn to talk and walk and everything. But he walked into the clinic a year later, and stuff like that. And I said, wow, this is bigger than I realized. It's so much bigger than I realized. I didn't realize chiropractic was that powerful. And I think that's the sad part of the young students today is they're told, chiropractic is good for neck pain, it's good for low back pain, but not for MS, not for cerebral palsy, not for the diagnosis of severe mental. He wasn't mentally retarded. It was just that the brainstem, it was cut off, from getting the pathways to the rest of the body, and it was turned back on. And so that's when I knew the chiropractic might really be something cool to get into. And so that's what I made. So I went to Palmer in '79 then, and graduated in '82 and started my practice. And yesterday I told the story that when I started my practice, the last seminar I took before I graduated, Doug and my dad sat me down and after the seminar, and I thought I might be in trouble or something, and they said they wanted to talk to me after the seminar, and they asked me what I planned on doing when I graduated. And I said, well, the game plan was I thought I would come back to Mount Horeb. I got married when I was at Palmer, and my wife is from Mount Horeb, and I thought, well, we would go back there and I would work at the clinic. And my dad and Doug looked at each other, and my dad said, we don't want you to come to the clinic. And I said, you don't? Thinking, why? I wasn't qualified. And they said, no, if you come here, everybody will ultimately expect you to take over this building and everything. And being built in '64, and it's, almost 20 years old, every time they had to repair the roof, every time they had to change the boiler system for the heaters, it was 100,000, 200,000 here even back then. And so they said, you could have such a better life and a better practice if you kept it small. Why don't you go down to the Chicago area and set up there, because almost 40% of our clientele was coming from the Chicagoland area, and it would be a great place to start. So we had no idea where we were going. We took a path down there. I stopped at each town and talked to the local chiropractors, and we came to one of the suburbs called Barrington, and there was only 2 chiropractors practicing. One was in his 70s, and the other one practiced 3 days a week. He had another practice in the city. And I met both of them, and they both said, sure, it'd be great to have you a third chiropractor in town. We went to the next town as we got closer to Chicago, and the next town they got closer to Chicago, and the next town they got closer to Chicago. And we noticed that as we came back out toward Barrington, it opened up a little bit. It wasn't all suburbia, and we felt like it was a little bit more like the Mount Horeb we grew up in a little bit. So we spent the night in Barrington, and I called my dad, and I said, I don't know, we're in some town called Barrington. It seems very nice. And he said, I'll talk to a few of my patients, see what they know. And next morning he said, yeah, they said that's one of the really nice suburbs. And it turns out it is one of the really nice suburbs. And so we opened up our doors and practice, and I had a budget. My dad said, well, go see if you can get a loan to buy some equipment. And we had nothing. We had no collateral, whatsoever. And my dad knew that would be a good experience for me to go in and meet the banker. And the banker laughed when I said, well, I've got a car that is 10 years old and has 120,000 miles on it. And
how old were you then?
25 years old, 25. I was 25 years old. With a newborn.
Yeah.
She was born in June, and we opened our practice in October. And we moved over there in August. We finally made the move over there in August and found a place. And then it took a month or so to get the practice open and get my equipment and all that kind of stuff, and opened up in October. So I'm starting my 42nd year right now. So the banker said, well, how much do you need? And I said, $50,000. And that was supposed to be $10,000 to live off of until I could, pay for my own bills. So that wasn't realistic. Yeah. But I decided I'd take out a ad in the local paper to let people know. And it was a little 3x5 ad, and it said, Cox Chiropractic now open, bringing the Gonstead technique to the Chicagoland area. Hours, Monday through Saturday, 8 to 8, Sunday by appointment. So I was going to be open all the time, because that's what I learned we should be doing. And so I got nobody from that ad. And then my very first patient was a patient who had seen my dad for a long time and came over and took pity on me, came to see me, And I adjusted him, and it went all right, and then I ended up getting a real patient that came in that first week. I'll never forget it. And, I had no other patients. So Patty is my receptionist. Our daughter's in the front room in a little bassinet thing. And so this new patient comes in I remember the second new patient I had that was a real patient. So I would go in the back room, call the front desk, and Patty would go, yes, I think we can get you in tomorrow. I had nobody booked the second day. And so we tried to make it look like, because I thought, it didn't have any credibility. So my practice was growing very slowly, and a lot of my friends that I'd gone to school with were Danish and Norwegians. And a really good friend, Eric Bjargo, who you know well. So I had talked to Eric, and he'd been in practice, because he worked in the x-ray department with us in '76. He interned at the clinic. So he went back to Norway and opened his practice, and I called him up and I said, Eric, how's your practice going? He goes, well, it takes about 3 months to get in to see me now. I said, what? You've been in practice for 4 years and there you're on? And he goes, yeah, that's just the way it works. Because at that time, you know, if you were a Norwegian and you were a Gonstead practitioner and you went back to Norway, you could have a practice pretty quick. And there weren't that many chiropractors at that point, you know, and so they really were booming. So my dad asked if I would start to teach, and I went in and taught the first time people taking technique, and Ray Clinton was out in front teaching the guys that had the students that had had more than one technique seminar. And so I would come home, my dad go, how's the practice going? And I'd go, oh, really well. Could I borrow some money? No, I didn't have any.
It's actually really comfortable, comforting to hear how tough it was also for you. I mean,
absolutely.
Everyone expects it's super tough.
Well, and I also thought they add Gonstead. Nobody knew what Gonstead was. They didn't care about that. They just thought here's some young punk trying to get, you know. So it was that Gonstead wasn't my ticket to instant success in using that term. So then I came back again, my dad, I said, Dad, my practice isn't growing near as fast. And he goes, so how many people would you see in a day? And I said, well, my biggest day so far, and this is probably 9 months in now, I'm practicing. My biggest day was only in the teens. I had like 14 or 15 patients, you know. But I was starting to average 1 new patient a day, so that was good. But I didn't take my father's advice, which had been given to me prior to this. And I told my dad, it's just not going, I'm not growing as fast as I would like. And he goes, are you asking for referrals? And I said, no. I need to? Shouldn't it be based on results? And he goes, no. When that patient gets better and you've seen them, you know, 3 or 4 times, and now that you say, let's leave it alone for a week to 10 days. And they come back and they're doing well. And I said, let's leave it for a couple of weeks to 4 weeks. And then they come back and then I would say, listen, why don't you, you know, we always recommended to get checked quarterly, meaning, you know, with the change of seasons every 3 months. But we say to patients, you'll find your own rhythm, you know. So now that it's been a month, you try to go a couple, 3 months and see how you're doing. And a lot of the management guys said, oh, you'll lose patients if you do that. That's how I built my practice, you know, doing it just like they did at the clinic. And so anyways, my dad said, start to ask for referrals. I told you that many times. And my dad goes, when you get to that point where that patient is going to leave, just say to them, you know, I have a very young family. I've just started, this is my first year. We came to an area where we knew no one. You're one of the few people I know in this area. If you know anybody else who could use chiropractic care or has a similar complaint that you came in to me for low back pain, headaches, or whatever it was, could you please refer me? Because I would like to be able to stay here to help you, but if I don't start getting some more business, I'm not going to be able to afford to stay open. My dad goes, and at that point, if you can let a little tear roll down your cheek, I never did that. But I started saying that to people, and patients go, well, sure, John. And then, you know,
that's something that's very hard for especially at least Norwegians and everyone I work with. It's like it's super hard to ask.
It is.
Yeah.
So, what I started doing then, so I would give them a do's and don't folder. You know, do you guys still have the do's and don'ts? Gonstead started that. It's just like, you know, don't do a sit up. You should walk.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
You know, put ice on. Don't do heat and all those kind of things. So I would give them the do's and don't pamphlet, and then I would grab 3 of my business cards, and I'd put them in the folder. I'd go, here's 3 cards, 1 for you to keep, and 2 to give to your friends to come and see me. This was after the very first visit I started doing that.
Very good.
By the way, a great story about Gonstead, how he got referrals, even up until the last day that he was in practice. So a guy would be coming to see Gonstead, and he might be, you know, and the guy was really good, and now maybe 6 months has passed. So the guy or the female comes back in to see Dr. Gonstead. And how you doing? Oh, I've been great. I just wanted to get a little tune-up, or I have a little pain. I want you to check me out. So Gonstead would adjust him and stuff, and Gonstead would start to head out of the adjusting room, and he would stop, and he would go, Elizabeth, are you mad at me about anything? No, Dr. Gonstead, you saved my life. Why would you even say that? Well, you've been coming to see me for 6 months, and you have not referred me a new patient. I tell you what, before you come back and see me again, you send somebody new. Now they can't come back to see him unless they refer a patient. That's how he would get referrals. He would say, what, are you mad? How come you haven't sent a friend yet? I remember Reggie Gold, and I went through and got a diplomat in philosophy. And Reggie Gold said, if we're explaining chiropractic correctly, and we're talking about what happened in the subluxation and what we found, especially with somebody who, you see a D3, D4, D5 disc, a disc that is thinned out and is degenerated. And they're not even in for, let's say that's a C5 or C6, but they came in for low back pain. And then I will point out on the x-ray, I'll say, well, it takes 15, 20, 25 years for that disc to get to that level. I said, if you didn't tell me what was wrong with you, I might have guessed that you were coming to see me for your neck, because you look at this neck that you see, here's the, and I'm showing the bones in the neck, and I said, see the thickness of this, the thickness of that disc? Now we get down here and you notice how that disc is thin? You heard that 20 years ago, 25 years ago. The patient starts to think and they go, when I was 20 years old, I was in a pretty bad car accident, but it didn't seem to affect me. And I said, well, see what happened is that vertebra got knocked out of place, and over the years it's been wearing itself down. And that's why it's thinned out. All the other ones are great, but that one got hurt at that time. And so they go, really? So they start to think about that. And what that clues into them is, my son was in a car accident 10 years ago. I probably should get him in just to be checked so he doesn't lose that. Or my wife had this problem, or my friend had that kind of a problem. So it gets them thinking about that kind of a thing. But Reggie would say, if we're explaining chiropractic correctly and the benefits of chiropractic and why you need to be checked, why wouldn't they want to send all their family members in to do that? And I still don't obviously explain it well enough, because I'll have a patient that I've seen for 10 years and I finally get their wife to come in to see me, or vice versa, or their kids. So, but I think that's one of the keys. You've got to ask for referrals, and you've got to be, I really do think, what BJ said, how do you expect your patients to love chiropractic if you don't love chiropractic, and Karen, I think the empathy thing we talked about yesterday is huge to build your practice in that. On that note, what do you think are the most important factors to cultivate us if you want to become a really good chiropractor? Genuinely caring about the person in front of you, meaning not faking it. So I've told this many times at the seminar, I can take a case history, I can ask all the right questions, I can nod, I can say all the right things, I can listen to them, and then let them know that this is a very common thing that I deal with. I'll let you know today whether or not I think I can help you, but I can. Examine them and then say, I'd like to take an A to P, a front and a side shot of your back and see what's going on. And I take the x-ray, I go back, I analyze the x-ray, I walk back in the room, and I couldn't tell you what that patient's chief complaint was. Because while I'm talking to that patient, I'm thinking, do I have all my bags packed for the Norwegian seminar? What time's the limo coming to pick us up? I'm thinking about all this. I'm being distracted by my issues in life, whether, like when Doug went through his divorce at the clinic, his numbers at the clinic dropped off significantly because he was so stressed out about that. He wasn't focused with the patient. So even though I faked my consultation questions with that patient, at some level in their subconscious, which is proven scientifically, they know I'm not 100% with him.
Yeah.
So now, and I really have gotten good at that, when I'm with you, because I'll come back in and I'll say, well, probably that car accident you were in when you were 15 years old. And they go, he remembered that. And I've only met them and talked with them for a brief time, but I'll say that. And I do have a good memory for activities that happen. I'm horrible with names. I'm great with activities and faces. But then they appreciate the fact that I really genuinely listen to them. To take it to the next level, I think what is really a good thing to do is that night, when you're on your way home, and I've told that patient, if they're acute, I might have to see them again 6 hours later that day, or I'm for sure going to see them the next day, or I'm going to for sure see them the 2 to 3 days following that first adjustment. Even if they're not acute, I want to check them and I tell them that's how I work. And I let them know I don't put anybody on a schedule or anything like that. My goal is to get you out of here as fast as you can. But when I really used to be busy and working a lot of hours and seeing a lot of patients, I couldn't remember the patient's name that I saw that morning as a new patient, or the first, those 2 new patients I had that morning. So the girl that's been with me for over 25 years, and so back 25 years ago, 20 years when I was really hustling, meaning not hustling patients, just working a lot of hours, she would just put on the mirror, Joe Blow came in to see you, chief complaint was his low back, with his phone number. So on my way home, or before I left the office, I would sit down and I'd say, hey, Mr. Jones, this is John Cox, the chiropractor you met today. I just wanted to see how you were doing after the adjustment. And was wondering if you're putting the ice on like I told you. Yeah, John. Yeah, thanks for calling. Yeah, it's kind of sore. I haven't felt much of a change. Your response is always the same. That's what I expected.
Yeah.
I feel great. That's what I expected. I really feel horrible. That's what I expected. Keep it short. No, never more than 30 seconds. And I said, that's why I wanted you to use the ice. I told you that the first adjustment is sometimes difficult because when it's been locked up for as long as your head, that's why I want to see you tomorrow, because it'll be much easier the second time. Make sure you put ice on in the morning when you get up, do some walking, whatever I've told him to do, depending on what the problem is. And I'll see you tomorrow. I cannot tell you how many patients, as I've gotten to know, even years later go, I'll never forget that you called me that first night and one. I've never had a dentist, a medical doctor, anybody follow up and ask me how I was doing after that visit. I had some patients go, I thought when you called me my check bounced or something. And so, and like Gonstead, I think the other thing is, never worry about the money. Even though when you start you worry about the money, you can't ever let that patient feel like you're willing to take care of a patient for absolutely nothing if it's there, like Sid Williams always said, never refuse care for patients, even if their inability to pay.
Yeah.
So I've had many patients over the years that have said to me, I came in to see you, John, but I just don't have the money, because the girls at the front desk told them what it would be for the consultation and the x-ray and the first adjustment. I just can't do that. And I'll say, listen, you can pay me overtime, that's it. And we have never sent a patient to collections in 42 years. I've never done that. And the person who's really down on their luck, so she's gone through a divorce, she's a single mom, she's working a job to pay her rent and do this, she doesn't have anything, and she tells me the story, and I said, listen, don't worry about the money. Or she's on welfare or something. We don't have many of those kind of people to come to see me. But if they're really down and out, I look them in the eye. Make sure when you take the consultation, take your own consultation. When they're talking to you, say, hold on just a second, make a few notes, and then look back at them and pay attention to they talk. Don't look at your notes and say, all right, go on with the story. Find out why they're there, what they've been going through, and then take the notes. And then you can start to explain what you do and what you think, what's going on with them. But when I have a patient that just, said, I'm really down and out, I can't afford this and stuff, I said, don't worry about the money. I tell you what I'm going to do. You have to pay me nothing. But when you can do, if I get results for you and I get some improvement for you, I want you to refer me one patient in the first month that can pay, and your debt is wiped clean. And so when I do that, they go, and I've never had somebody that they didn't do that. Because they know somebody who's got a job that can pay, so they get that. And then just remember this, when you first start out, you do not know the patient that is in front of you that will build your practice for you. It may be the stinkiest, uneducated, oldest, youngest, non-professional person in the world that sends patients to you, where, I would get a banker in or I would get a lawyer in. I thought, now this guy's influential, he belongs to a country club, he's a millionaire, all these kind of things. This dude is in. And then we have a miracle result with this guy, never sends me one patient. Then I've got a guy that's a mechanic, works on cars, comes in greasy, no education, went right to work working on cars, gets minimal results, and sends me 10 patients the first year, so you never know. So you treat everybody as an equal. I never talk down to anybody, because that's one of the complaints in the medical world is they think, they know everything, and when I don't know the answer to a question, I say, listen, I'm fortunate enough to be in a family of chiropractors, and I have a lot of good friends I can talk to. I'm going to find more about your hypothyroid or your hyperthyroid or, this thing going on. And now I know a lot of that stuff, but back then I would say, I'll get that answer for you. And then I'll call them and give them that answer for something, that night that I want to do. In the medical world, I'm so disappointed when I have a patient that's worried about a dire situation like cancer, or, they're getting blood work and, the medical doctor said, we've seen something on your x-ray, we're going to run this test, I'll get back to you tomorrow. And that patient doesn't get the call, and it's a Friday. So they call the office, and the doctor will be back in Monday. Now they have to wait 3 days, and they have to do that. The other thing, that you'll have a woman in her late 30s to early 40s, and she's got some kind of neuropathy, she's got a neuritis that's going down her arm, she's got this pain. They do an EMG, they do x-rays and MRI and everything, and they go, we just can't find anything that's really wrong with you. I'm going to give you some anti-inflammatories and muscle relaxers. but you could be in the early stages of MS. Have a nice day. You know, and that woman walks out of there and comes in. Now she's in the ropes. They said they just gave me drugs. They show up in your office. You need to sit down and explain. That was the most unprofessional thing. That's the last thing you have, I would tell them right off the bat. I said, that's my second biggest business, the neck, shoulder, and arm pain. I will say that if I can get some results for you in 2 to 3 visits, that's what it is. Do not worry about that. We'll get that out of your head, you know, because that's like the patient that sees the oncologist and they've got terminal cancer and they look them in the eye and say, I would get your shit together because you got about 6 months to live. I've had so many patients that have been told that are still alive 5 years later. What they should say, you never remove hope from a patient. You say to that patient, you've got a serious situation, you know, it's metastasized over here and I don't know what's going to happen with you. You could be gone in 6 months, but you might be around for another 6 years. I really think asking for referrals, showing as much empathy and concern for the patient is...
Asking for referrals, which is a good thing, and be super present when you're there. Yeah. Just the only important person is the person in front of you. If you could choose one more thing, like I said, like one of the biggest things.
When you graduate, this was told me by a field doctor, I mentioned this yesterday, in a very little town in middle of Illinois in a farm community of 400 people. This guy would see regularly 60 patients, 70 patients every single day from 100 miles around. And the longer you're in practice, you start getting people that drive all the way up to see you, even though there's 400 chiropractors they pass in Chicago for that. He told me, I don't care that your last name is Cox, I don't care that you can give an adjustment. Unless you're available, you will not be successful. He said you need to be in your office and available, especially when you first start, every single day. So that's why when I put my ad in, 8 to 8, Monday through Saturday, Sunday by appointments, you know. And I was willing to see a patient anytime. Yeah. And I still do that, not quite as much as I used to do, but 10% of my patients that come in are migraine and headache patients. And if you've ever seen somebody with a full-blown migraine and they're throwing up and sick like that, I would tell them, when you get the aura and you start to feel that, that would be the time I'd like to see you and I may be able to abort the full-on migraine. And they'll go, well, sometimes it kicks in at 2 in the morning. That's when you call me. I've been in my office at 2 in the morning with a woman throwing up in my wastebasket. Do not buy a wastebasket that is wicker, by the way. That's what I had at the time. You need a solid wastebasket. And I adjusted her, and I don't even charge them for that visit. I mean, I could charge extra for, they're trying to give me cash. I said, no, this is past office hours. This is just on your name.
To be available when people really need you, and that's actually just giving excellent service.
Exactly. You know what happens if I see that patient at 2 in the morning? They tell, and especially if I help them with that, they tell all their friends, what do you mean he came in at 2 in the morning to see you? What did he charge you for that? He didn't charge me anything. And the other thing that I said yesterday that is really a good thing, when you go to take a seminar as a student, let's say you're in your first or second year of practice, you come back on Monday and you see that patient that you're having trouble with. And I will tell you, you will think more about the patients that do not respond every day.
Those are the ones you always remember.
Then the ones that have miracle cases, you go, why isn't she or he turning around? This is the 4th or 5th visit and I'm still not getting any response. You see that patient on Monday morning after you're at the seminar and you say to that person, I went to a seminar this weekend and it's all about the technique Gonstead. And I met with guys that have been doing this for 40, 50, 60 years. And I talked about your case, and I was thinking about what we've been doing together with you this weekend. And I think maybe I've decided that we're going to do this a little different approach on that 5th lumbar or your ilium, or I'm going to look at this instead. They said, if it's not changing, maybe look at this. Okay, let's try it. And so they do that. Even if maybe you still don't get the response, they leave the office going, he or she was away at a seminar, asked if I could get more help for my condition, and they were thinking about me over the weekend instead of partying and just paying attention to themselves. That says worlds about what kind of a human you are and what you really genuinely care. So I think that genuineness, be available, and really, you have to set yourself to your own standard of adjusting. You may feel your adjustment is really good, but is it really good compared to my father's adjustment? That's what scared me when I would see my father or my uncle's patients. is I know that is nothing like my dad's adjustment, you know, and I think if you set yourself to a really high standard and you know, yeah, that was good, but it wasn't really that deep of a set, you say to that patient, you know, I'm not really happy with that set. Could you come back over in about 6 hours? Let me do it again. And I would have patients that would do that. I have it to this day. I go out to the front desk and I'll say, Ruth, could you get him back in later this afternoon? And then I do this. I put up 2 fingers, 4 fingers, 1 finger, 2 for 1. I don't even have to do it anymore. Ruth goes, yeah. So I say nothing to the patient about that. They come back in that afternoon, or they come back the next day because they couldn't get in that afternoon, or later in the day. They come back in, I give them the adjustment, I run a cash practice, they go out to the front desk, they take out their credit card, they take out their cash or their checkbook or whatever, and Ruth goes, no, John said that was part of yesterday's. No, he will not attend. That was part of your visit from yesterday. And they leave going, he actually cared more about helping me than collecting that money that day. That's volumes. That's just like people go, what? Nobody does that. You can't, you know, I don't think any medical doctor does that. By the way, now Medicare, you know, because now that I'm 67, a lot of my patients are 87 because they've grown up with me. I did that and I got a call from because we have to submit to Medicare. Medicare patients pay me, but then the Medicare reimburses. You know, when you're over 65, you start to get that kind of service in our country. So I get a call from Medicare, and they wanted my notes on this certain patient. And this lady calls me and she goes, Dr. Cox, I saw you saw the patient on Monday, you know, October, whatever it was, and November, whatever it was. And I said, yes. And she goes, the next day, you saw the patient again, but there was no charge for that. And I said, did you see what I wrote next to that? No charge next time. And I put NC&T. She goes, I saw there's a note there, NC&T, and that means no charge next time. And I go, yeah. And she goes, well, why would you do that? And I said, I wasn't happy with the adjustment I got. And I said, you come back tomorrow, I want to see if we can get a little bit more of that. And I don't charge for that. And she goes, you're not allowed to do that. And I said, what do you mean I'm not allowed to do it? It's my practice, isn't it? And she goes, no, because we don't know if you're taking cash on the side or you're taking money, but you're not telling us that you took money. You can't do that. And I said, first of all, I never have done that. You're welcome to call all of my Medicare patients and ask. She goes, no, I believe you, but you're just not able to do that. It's against the rules. And I said, okay. And I said, everything good? And she goes, yeah. And then she goes, all right, off the record. I go, yeah, off the record what? I think that's very admirable that you do that. If you want to do that anymore, just write don't put any notes in your records that you saw that day. So I still do it, I just don't write it down. No, that's on a podcast, I'll probably get arrested.
Before we wrap up, I would love to hear what is it that keeps you going? I mean, you've been working for so long and you are so enthusiastic and just bursting of love for chiropractic. What's the main thing that keeps you going?
Results of patients. I don't care about the money anymore at all, because we've done quite well and things are paid off and that kind of stuff. I still go in 6 days a week. I've definitely cut back my hours compared to what I used to do.
How many hours do you do now?
I'm only about 28 hours anymore a week, so I'm pretty lazy now as a composer. I used to work 45, 55 hours, every week in the past and stuff. But most of my patients now, I mean, I still take new patients because but most of my patients are my friends now. I'm into my third generation of I know the kids, the grandkids, I know everybody. I know who's died, who's living, who's born, I know all that kind of stuff. So in the beginning, I used to talk a lot more chiropractic. Now I talk very little chiropractic, except to a new patient.
Yeah, so this is a social...
It's a social event every day, And so my patients, I have this couple that comes to see me twice from New York, and they come out and they spend a week because they can't find anybody to give them an adjustment. And they got referred by somebody else, I don't know how, a family member that was back in Chicago. But they come out, they stay in a hotel and hang out with me. And so they'll come in and get checked every day while they're there. Sometimes twice, because she's got a lot of issues. He's pretty easy. I might only adjust him once or twice in the whole week. But every time they'll go, you're having too much fun in that room next door. They go, are you always this happy? I go, well, yeah, you guys are the kind of people I like to take care of. You're nice people, And so that's really what keeps me going. It's not, it's not, it becomes a family, you know, it becomes people that you genuinely care about, and you've grown up with them, and you know their tragedies, you know their joys, you know all that kind of stuff. And
something happens when you touch people.
And that's the other thing.
It's open up, and then the connection is just there.
Well, I think too, as you get better, in the beginning, young people, by the way, if you and I both saw that same patient, I might get results in 1, 2, or 3 visits. It may take you 6, 7, 8 visits to get the same results. Because of my years of experience and be able to find the major subluxation, that doesn't happen right away. It takes a long time to get good at palpation and giving adjustment.
How long does it take?
Gonstead used to say it takes 30,000 adjustments on that segment before he would consider you good at it.
Oh, so 30,000 on the C3 and 30,000 C7.
Exactly. So that's kind of frustrating with that. But if you're sincere when you first start practice with your very first patient, and they can feel that you're trying your best, you really want them, you called them, you want them to get, you maybe say, listen, that was no good, come back over this afternoon, you give them that adjustment, there's no charge for that, those kind of things. They will give you the chance to get to the 6th or 7th adjustment where you finally get it set, where I might be able to do it in 2 or 3, you might be able to do it in 2 or 3. That comes from experience, and there's just no getting around. This is an art form, and the more you practice, the more you think about it. You know, I had a hard time adjusting cervicals before I got into student clinic. So my dad's looking at my setups, you know, Doug's looking at my setups, I'm setting up on them, trying to do this, they're saying that was good, that was bad, you got to do this, lighten up, do that, all that kind of stuff. And I still wasn't getting good sets on the cervicals. I mean, I was hitting, you know, 20% of the ones I even tried to get an audible out of it. So I told my dad, I'm really frustrated. And my dad goes, are you thinking about it? I go, thinking about what? He goes, about giving the adjustment. I said, well, yeah, I guess I'm thinking about it. And my dad goes, you'll never get the adjustment until it starts to become an obsessive thought that you think about it when you first wake up, you go to it before you go to sleep, because you've got to tell yourself, why aren't I doing that? You have to visualize it in your mind's eye all the time. This is the thrust I want to make. This is the thrust I want to make. And if you start to do that, and that's when it changed. And I will honestly tell you, it was probably 15 years to 18 years in practice before I really got good at the knee chest table. It is by far my favorite table. I have patients that hate that table, but they know that's the place that I can fix them, you know, and it's just so useful of a table, and you know, it's a great place to hurt people. That's why people, I think, are shy away from it. But it is a place that gets the most ultimate results. And if you're good at it, like I said, you know, 9 million people in Chicagoland, there's probably a dozen knee chests in all of Chicagoland, and I own 2 of them. You know, I mean, there's very few people that have it. So it sets me apart. That, I think, is another key for young people. You need to set yourself apart. You need to show somehow you're different, whether it be empathy or whether it be your technique and your approach to caring for people. Then you don't just say, I'm going to see you 3 times a week for 6 weeks and then 2 times a week for 4, those kind of things. They all have heard that, and they don't want to do that. You know, I don't want to go see any doctor 3 times a week. I don't care who he is, you know, and no, I don't have time for that, number one. But I think that, you know, when it comes to, you know, like we said yesterday, none of us ever talk about how much money we make or how many patients we see or any of that kind of thing, because that doesn't really matter. I contribute my success in chiropractic, not to the numbers that I did or, you know, making a practice from scratch and all that kind of thing. I consider myself successfu because I was able to keep most of my father and my uncle's patients because those are big shoes to step into, you know. And I had a lady that came and been seeing my dad for years, and it got hard for her to make the trip up to Mount Horeb, and she was only a half hour from me. So she came to see me, and, you know, she brings her card in from the clinic, and I've got the listings. C3 was her major, and her neck was really bothering her, and I got a break. I said, so I set her C3. To this day, now this is 30 years, 25 years ago, I set her C3. It was PR inferior, double check mark, which means that's a major. I set that C3, and I said, how was that? And she goes, you didn't get it. I reset up, got another audible. No, you didn't get it. Why don't you give your dad a call? So I have a phone in the room, I call my dad, I get to the front desk, can I take to my dad? You know, he would take my calls always right at. I got Mrs. Jones in there. She got a C3, PR inferior, I can't get it. My dad goes, you have to make sure that your line of drive is aiming up at her glabella. You're not getting, it's the inferiority on her that makes the big difference. So I said, okay. back in the chair, set her up again. I dropped my elbow down. I think the glabella's that way. I was going more to straight PDA and not enough IDS. It moved again, and she goes, there, you got it. So I've always asked my patients to saw any other chiropractor.
Yeah.
If it was a patient of yours that came to see me, I would say, what does she do to you? Does she put you on her side? Does she put you on the high-low? How does she? Because I want to do it as close to, if she's obviously happy with you, I want to try to do it just as close to that. And so I always ask the patient, is that pretty much the audible, or is that the depth of the set that you like? No, your dad, or Elizabeth usually gets it a little bit deeper, or she sometimes has to do it again on the high-low. I'll say, all right, let's go over here and set it again. I want to do it like that. So.
Well, thank you so much, John. There's so much wisdom here, and I'm just soaking in it, and I love to listen to you. So don't be scared of asking the patient, for
a referral.
For referrals.
Yeah, as soon as they show some improvement, let them know.
Just let them know.
Do you know anybody else that has similar things? I'm starting my practice. I really need some help with some referrals. And then make sure you send a handwritten card to that person when they refer them in. I don't care if it's the husband or wife. An immediate family comes in. You write a note and say, thank you very much, Mrs. Jones. I met your husband. He's a very nice guy. I think I can help him. I really appreciate you helping my family and my practice out.
And then call your new patients up
that evening
to check the same evening to check how they're doing, and visualize, be obsessed with what you're going to do.
Absolutely.
Visualize that the segment and your practice and everything you want to achieve. Be obsessed about it, and just love being in your practice.
Yeah. And I think too, the other thing obviously is confidence. And you don't have any confidence when you start. I didn't have any confidence when I started, even though I'd had 19 seminars before. But going to the seminars, we heard the amazing stories of taking care of an MS patient or a cerebral palsy patient. That gave me confidence. My very first cerebral palsy patient was a little boy that came to me, and he was all tied up in knots with his hands and his feet like that, and he had a bib on. And I'd heard that, because they drool a lot of time, and he was, in his wheelchair, and, the mother was a patient, and her husband became a patient, and they brought this little, as their only child at that time, and he was 5-ish or something like that, but he was drooling on himself. And I remember my dad or Doug saying that if you can even get that child to quit drooling, it's a miracle for the mom and dad. And she told me that they told us he would never walk. And I told them about the cross crawl pattern, and do that. And so every day, 3 times a day, they would get on either side of him, and one would grab a leg, one would grab an arm, and then you'd lift the right leg up, and she would lift the left arm up and touch him and do that and go back and forth. The boy eventually walked, by the way, but after 2 adjustments, he quit drooling. I had never seen it happen before. So, it was a miracle for me, which built my philosophy, built my confidence in chiropractic, and built my confidence in me. So we can tell you great stories and we can try to inspire you, but till it happens to you personally, it doesn't really mean as much. My first asthmatic, this lady goes, I've heard chiropractic can help asthma. And I said, it certainly can. Yes, I'd never seen an asthma patient. So she came in, and I said, does he take a puffer and inhaler? And she said, yes. And I said, before he comes in, don't have him take a puff. I'd like to hear him. Remember they taught us about rails and what the lungs sounded in an asthmatic, So I took my stethoscope out, which, I'm not qualified to even use a stethoscope out there for blood pressure. But I put it on his chest, and he took a breath, and, it was like that. He couldn't get air hardly in or out. And I said, so in the seminar we teach about dry asthma and wet asthma and sympathetic versus parasympathetic. And I won't tell you what I adjusted on him, but it was mid-dorsal. And so I scoped him. I didn't take an x-ray on him. He was young. He was only 6 or 7 years of age. And he hadn't gone on a steroidal inhaler. He was using like albuterol or non-steroidal inhaler. And I put him on the high-low, and I adjusted that one segment. And the high-low came up. I went back to my desk and wrote it down. The mom was sitting right next to my desk. I can see it right now. He got off the high-low and walked to his mom and went, he took a big deep breath immediately. And she goes, did you take a puff on your inhaler? And he goes, no, Ma, you have my inhaler. And I out loud said, holy shit. I didn't know it could happen that fast. And she goes, excuse me? And I said, that's amazing. I've never had one. I've never had anybody respond. So that's when I told this. I've told that at the seminar for years, that's when I said, again, this is bigger than we really understand how big it is. Because if you can turn the nervous system back on, it can work, especially with children. If you want to build your philosophy, take care of kids, because they respond so much faster than an 80-year-old guy that's had it for 40 years or 80 years. That's really hard. They don't respond as fast. Some do, but most of the kids are wonderful. And kids are more fun to be around than old people. But now I can't say that. Some of my dearest friends are my oldest patients. They're sweethearts, and both men and women. So.
Thank you so much, John.
That was nice.
So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I love listening to you, and I'm so happy that you were here.
It's great to see you again. Thanks for coming all the way over for the seminar, by the way. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.